Okay, looks like we are broadcasting. So as we get settled here, we'll just give people a few minutes to get logged in. And Adam and Scott were just continuing a puppy conversation. So
Obviously,
feel free to
obviously,
continue.
we're talking about puppies. Yeah, it has been. I was talking to my sister actually, who she covers the NBA draft for Yahoo Sports, and she was telling me how she's always telling these young kids when they get drafted, like, don't get a puppy, but they always get a puppy. She's like, but you're on the road all of the time. You should not, shouldn't, but they do, every one of them.
Yeah, we had decided we're absolutely not getting a puppy. We were hoping to get adopt a dog that was maybe one or two, but they just were gone from the shelters. Everybody was a few steps ahead of us.
Yeah.
But yeah, the puppies are awesome. I like getting up early, but with him, he would wake up at 4:30 or 5 in the morning. So it was even a little more impetus to get up and see the sunrise.
Right. We've got our kids, and I think people get it flipped when they say, well, yeah, you should have a puppy before you have kids. And I'm like, I think you should have kids before you have a puppy. Um, I think that having children really prepares you for all that you need to raise a puppy.
Yeah, it's funny how quickly they grow. The puppies, or they just progress much quicker. So it's nice to know what's coming, which you can
Yeah.
learn from having kids.
Yep. Indeed.
Are they getting along, Scott?
They are. It took a while for Nisha, our older one, to kind of warm up to Rocky, but yeah, she puts up with them, and I think she actually likes them.
Good. Keeps her young.
It does keep her young. Yeah, we can find her waist again, so it's been good for her, kind of her as she goes out and lays on the beach. She's looking good.
Excellent. All right. Well, looks like we can get started here. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our live Q&A session on manufacturing and packaging and sustainability. So now that we're all settled in, we can get started. So I've got with me Dragon Innovations CEO and co-founder Scott N. Miller, and then also Adam Peak from Fortis Solutions Group and the People of Packaging podcast. So why don't we just start off by giving brief intros to the audience. So Adam, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, for sure. Appreciate it, Andrew. I'm excited to dig into this. So yeah, I host a podcast on packaging. And I remember when I first started it 2 years ago, my daughter, who was, she was 9 at the time, she's now 11. She said, why would you host a packaging podcast? That sounds really boring. And that's kind of the general gist I get from a lot of people, and until they really start to dig into it and find out packaging's pretty cool. So I love doing that. I get to co-host it with my good friend, Ted Tate. We don't make any revenue from the podcast. It's a way to share stories of incredible people in the packaging industry. I saw Dr. Vicky Van Hurley already said hi. So hi, Dr. Van Hurley. She was a recent guest on the podcast and is cool. So just get to meet a lot of people. I have 5 children, and my wife and I we grew up together, elementary school, middle school, high school, been married for 17 and a half years. We have 5 kids, and I have a full-time job in the packaging industry working with pressure sensitive labels, flexible films, shrink sleeves, and folding carton boxes, and even automation equipment, where I am the business development and channel partner manager for Fortis Solutions Group. So it's exciting. Thanks for having me on.
Excellent. Scott, you want to go next?
Sure, yeah, and thanks Andrew and Adam for pulling this together. I'm really excited to talk about packaging. It's as you were saying, Andrew, Adam, there's a lot of really cool stuff as you dig into it. So this will be a good hour ahead of us. So I'm the CEO of Dragon Innovation. We started Dragon about 11 years ago after having spent 10 years at iRobot, launching the first few million Roombas. And what we wanted to do is help other companies be able to navigate that journey from once they were able to build a working prototype through thinking about design for manufacture and assembly to how do you actually pick a factory. And then when you have a factory, how do you work productively with them to be able to get to product on the loading dock? And it's been an incredible journey. Just had the chance to work with many hundred phenomenal customers and grow a great team.
Fantastic. So why don't I give a brief on myself? So I'm Andrew. I head up marketing here at Dragon Innovation. So I'll give you a quick overview of Dragon. So we are a manufacturing consulting partner for companies, like Scott was saying, who are building complex products and need help with the new product introduction process all the way through ongoing production. So we can help you whether you're in the early idea, proof of concept phases of the manufacturing process with our content and educational resources, or when you have a working prototype, like Scott was saying, we can help you scale that up to high volume manufacturing through our global vetted factory database and manufacturing resources network. So as well as when you're going through the ongoing production process and going through versions 2, 3, 4, and looking to optimize their supply chain, we can also help you with that process as well. So Adam, do you want to give a brief on the packaging and podcast, or people?
Yeah, it's very alliteratory. It's fine. People of Packaging podcast. Yeah, so you guys can read the slide, but in a nutshell, myself and Ted started the podcast 2 years ago to elevate people's stories, and we disproportionately highlight stories of people of color and women in the packaging industry. Because we really saw when you go to these trade shows, it seemed like there was not very great representation from the stage at a lot of these trade shows. And so we wanted to use a podcast forum. Podcasts are one of the fastest growing mediums for media in the world. We've certainly seen that. So a couple of, I'm in Salt Lake City, Utah, Ted's in New Jersey, and we're not professional media people. Ted's a packaging engineer, and I do business development for a packaging company. And we have just kind of seen it take off. So we're just over 7,000 total downloads in a year and a half that it's been live in 50 plus countries. So that's kind of what it is. And I'm always on the lookout for just telling really fun stories. It's not super technical. We don't get into the weeds on the technical aspects of packaging. And for a time, we were the only active packaging podcast in the world, which was kind of fun to say. I had the #1 podcast. I don't know if that's true or not anymore.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, thank you for joining us, and thank you, Scott, too, as well. And so since this is a live Q&A, we thought we'd start off asking you all a couple of questions. So we typically like to know who's attending these, just so we can help cater our answers a little bit more geared towards each audience type. So I'm going to run a couple polls here just to give us a sense of who you are and what your role is at the company. So I'll launch this first poll. And if you can just give a quick answer here. This helps us, just frame our answers around who's attending.
Hosts and panelists cannot vote, apparently. I went in, I was like, can't. You guys already know my role.
Yes, I'll be able to share the results here in a second.
Cool. And as you do that, Andrew, I'm just going to throw the puppy in the other room because I think he's awake and playing. So be right back. Hey, Rocky.
Sounds good. All right. So that'll end poll #1. So I can share results here. So it looks like we have about 30% CEO co-founders, 22% engineers, and then 30% other. So, and then a mix of operations and designers. So that's a great mix. I think that this will hopefully be serving all of you with the wide array of questions that we've gotten so far. So I think that we'll be in good shape there. So then I'm going to launch our second poll. So this just helps us understand where you are in your process. So if you're actively working on a product, have an idea, or just here for educational resources, happy to learn a little bit more about you all and what you're trying to get out of this. Alrighty. So it looks like we have about a 60-40 split of people who are actually working on a product or people who are just here for some educational resources. So that's great. So now that we're done with the polls, we know a little bit more about you, you know a little bit more about us. Why don't we just jump right into it? So we had a lot of great questions that we're going to try to get through as many as we can. So if we have time for some more questions, you can leave some of those in the chat or the Q&A section of Zoom. And if we don't get to them, don't worry, we can follow up with you afterwards. And just so everybody's aware, this is recording. So if you have to jump off, no worries. And if you don't hear your question answered, you can watch it on demand after we're all set with this. And then we'll share that out with everybody who's attending as well. So just to set the stage, the focus and the majority of the questions that came in were in regards to packaging and manufacturing, and specifically related to sustainability. But we did have a handful of general manufacturing knowledge questions come in too. So if we have time, we can get to those as well. But I was actually very impressed with the quality and quantity of questions that we were getting on this subject. So if everybody is ready, we can jump right in here. All righty. So again, there was some overlap with some of the questions, so we combined a handful of them. And so I'll try to combine those and let Scott and Adam take those on for.
Are Scott and I allowed to argue with one another? Is that
please? Yeah, please.
Yeah.
Point counterpoint. That's the name of the game here. So, all right, why don't we start off? So, one person asked about if you have a manufacturing packaging checklist, and so specifically, they're interested in understanding more about the most ecological, ethically sustainable packaging materials. So, kind of combining like what do you start with from a packaging perspective, and then from a sustainability side of things, what are some of those most ecological and ethically sustainable packaging materials? So, Adam, do you want to start us off with this one?
Yeah, that'd be fun. So I actually just had this conversation with somebody yesterday. Sometimes I think we want to start with kind of the more fun things to talk about, and it's probably not the best thing to jump into first, because packaging does have a very primary function, which is, does it protect the product? If it cannot protect your product, I don't care if it's food, I don't care if it's electronics, I don't care if it's beverage, personal care, whatever it is. If it does not protect your product, it is not sustainable. And I spend a lot of time talking with people about sustainability, and what does that mean? Oftentimes everyone goes to what's its impact on the environment, and that's a great question. But again, if it's not going to protect your product, you by definition cannot sustain business. It has to get from point A to point B. Secondarily, I think, does it protect the product? And secondarily does it protect your brand's integrity? That's another huge component of packaging, especially if you're in a retail environment where a lot of people live. It's, our attention spans are getting less and less and less. And so if you're trying to grab attention in a retail environment, the packaging is really the only way to do that. You don't want to be dependent on, somebody who works at the retailer to sell your stuff. So, going through this checklist of, does it protect the product, which you absolutely should be getting packaging engineers involved. Even if you don't employ one, you should be looking out to companies who provide them as consulting services. They're incredibly valuable. Does it provide brand integrity? And then kind of third, is what's the impact on your cost of goods sold? So what's the total applied cost of your packaging, and really digging into that, and taking into consideration, if it doesn't do the first, then you're going to get a lot of product returns, damage in shipment, expiring if it's food and beverages. So, and then lastly is, what's the impact on the planet? And I don't mean that that's lastly in terms of like, is it important or is it not important? It's part of the checklist. You have to determine what that is. Unilever just announced that they're going to be relabeling their products to include a carbon, what's the carbon emissions from their products, so that you can have a carbon rating. So there's a lot of attention paid to that, and it is important. But I think that people like to skip over the first three, and it's to their detriment. So those are kind of my four things that I would go through on a packaging checklist. I mean, there's obviously very specific things to very specific products that you would want to dig into further, but in general, that's where I would land.
Cool. Scott, anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, that unfortunately, I can't argue with any of that. That mirrors
Come on!
my experience, but maybe I'll augment. So one of the things you were talking a little bit about is ecologically and ethically sustainable. So, step one is get the product from point A to point B. But there's all sorts of variations on that. And the one that's my personal pet peeve is the one-use multi-layer plastic packaging. So stuff that is just accomplishing that first item on the checklist, but it's never going to be reused as part of the product again. It's not going to be a carrying case. It's just something that the customer has to dispose of right after it. And this is a little bit more relevant for packaging that protects food, but often they'll do multiple layers of different plastics. And when you do that, you can't as easily separate it into the core components, which makes it incredibly challenging to recycle. So from a landfill standpoint, which is my main focus in sustainability, and that's a much broader topic, and there's a lot of lenses to look through sustainability. But for me, I just realized, like, we've built, at least in my career, tens, if not hundreds of millions of products. And at some point, they're gonna, if we're not careful, end up in landfill. So how can we be kinder to the earth as we think through this? And one of the key principles is reduce, reuse, recycle. If we assume it's going to be recycled, you have to make it so that when it goes into that recycling stream, it's easy to do, and the multi-layers are nearly impossible. So thinking through, what are the material selections you make up front to enable it to be kinder to the earth would be an augmentation, but not
Right.
Not yet.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think if I can kind of follow up on that, because it is interesting where you have the difficult decision on so if you take food, as you use food as an example, if there is a foil layer and then you need a sealing layer, those are obviously two different layers. And the reason that you want the foil is because the food, its biggest enemy is oxygen and moisture. And so the foil keeps all of that away. So then your food lasts longer. And that's where this nuance, and that's where the conversation ends up, is if you put it into a, say a recyclable pouch, but your food, which is one of the single greatest contributors to greenhouse gas emissions, it even ends up in a landfill, which is a tomb and not getting oxygen. So it's not even deteriorating there. So it's an interesting conversation. This whole idea of sustainability, I wish it was for packaging. I wish it was super simple, but we can't be throwing away, food either. So that's where I think the discussion, that's why I start with, is it really good for the product? I saw a study that the product that the packaging is in likely has 10 to 20%, 10 to 20 times more negative impact on the environment than the packaging itself. And so you want to make sure that that product is doing its job, whatever it is, electronics, or we can't have those, ending up in the landfill, certainly, because that's, eventually something's going to happen to it. But yeah, you're right. It's a big problem in the packaging industry that a lot of really smart people are trying to solve. And in some cases, you just have to make the lesser of two evil decisions, I guess, if that's the best way to put it.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, there is all sorts of innovation around, obviously more environmentally gentle packaging, which maybe we'll get into in a little bit.
Yeah, let's do
it. But yeah, there's a huge opportunity to innovate there.
Mm-hmm. For sure.
Fantastic. So continuing along, just to get a little bit more general knowledge about packaging in general. So we had a question come in and said, how to define packaging requirements and what to look out for. So I'll kick this to you, Scott, to kick us off.
Sure. So one of the things that we use is the ISTA, which is the International Safe Transit Association. And it comes in different ratings, typically 1A, 2A, 3A, with 3A being more stringent. And effectively, this is a set of requirements or guidelines for the assorted loads and forces that a packaged product needs to withstand as a function of weight. So I might be a little off on the value, but I think it a breakpoint's at like 159 pounds. So if you weigh more than that, you have different guidelines. If you weigh less than that, you have an initial set of guidelines. And it looks at things like crush test, stacking test, what height can you drop the box? What is a different orientation? Is it a edge drop, corner drop, face drop? But these are just incredibly helpful in terms of having specific metrics that you can then test your product to see if you comply or not, as opposed to trying to figure it out from scratch. So that's usually what we use. And again, that's on what we think of like a master carton basis. We also would do fairly extensive testing in terms of temperature and humidity to make sure, for example, if you built your product in China in the summer, in southern China, it's fairly humid, and then you shipped it to, say, Alaska, which could be quite cold, and then put it on a truck down to Florida, you don't want to have a rainstorm inside your product due to the humidity condensing. So those are all things you'd want to test. And then we think a lot about vibration. So when we were building the Roomba, we had this great sort of medieval machine that would shake 57,000 times in 50 minutes. So it's just like a giant paint shaker, but larger. And you'd put the master cartons on that, and it would wiggle them all around. And what that would do is simulate what would happen if the product was in the back of a truck driving over a road. So you look at scuffing, and that's often why products will include poly bags or plastic bags around every piece, which just kills me because it's such a waste of plastic, but it does prevent the scuffing. So those are some of the tests that we look at. Other things, anytime you have ink, and Adam may know a lot more about this than I do, but the inks and the dyes can be problematic. So just making sure that they don't have heavy metals in them, and it's a letter that is all testing you'd want to do at the very basic level when you're actually getting in that ink.
Yeah, packaging by one estimation is the third largest industry in the world, and so it's the testing requirements vary. Whether it's shipping and drop testing, and ISTA is awesome for that. You can get into, like when we were talking, Scott, you and I were talking about food with those films, and you want to measure moisture and oxygen transmission. If you're talking about putting a label on a product, you want to know, is it going to lift? Is it going to stay on the bottle? So there's adhesive testing and there's rub testing, and what is is the ink going to stay on, and crush testing for cartons, and shrink sleeve testing, and migration. So you want to make sure that the ink that you're using is not migrating through specifically on food and beverage and even personal care. But you can see situations where the ink is gonna go through and contaminate the product. Or if you have like a roll stock of film, you want to make sure that the inks are buried in that roll stock, because you don't want the ink to transfer onto the other side, and then the ink's in it. There's a lot of different stuff that goes into consideration, and there are a ton of audits for that various packaging companies have to go through. So there's lots of definitions about it out there. It might sound overwhelming, but if whatever it is that you have, there's something probably very specific. And you certainly want to have third-party audits for your packaging suppliers, so that you can have somebody else to yell at if they screw up.
Yeah, and one of the things that always strikes me about packaging is most people leave it to the end. They don't think about it. But packaging is like its own product. You might injection mold it, or you may have to create the corrugated from scratch. So it has its own lead times and supply chain and different vendors that have to be stitched together. So it's a lot more, yes, it protects the product, but to get to that point, there's a lot of stuff that has to happen.
Well, can I extrapolate on that? Maybe we'll get into this or not, but Tom Zaki wrote a book called The Future of Packaging, which is awesome. And he's really doing some cool stuff with Loop and with TerraCycle on innovative recycling ways, and creating reusable packaging that can be reused hundreds of times through a closed loop system. But Tom really illuminated me to this in his book, which was everybody is a packaging buyer. So in America, you sell packaging. I mean, you might sell a Roomba, but you also sell the packaging, or at least you buy the packaging. And so we have not really, I think, thought through what that is, that when I buy it, you have to help them do something with it, whether it's typically disposal. And so, just kind of thinking through that at the beginning of the process rather than at the end. Like, packaging is not just it's not just the protecting the product. It's not just this annoying thing that you have to put into your cost of goods sold. It's actually a product in and of itself that you're selling to your consumer. And so if it's annoying to open, they're less likely to buy your product again or recommend it.
Yeah. I mean, I hate those ones, the
Yes.
plastic clamshell,
Yes.
where you
Yes.
can't pull them apart. You've got to get out a knife. You end up cutting your thumb off. It's or the packaging cuts you. Like,
Oh yeah, I put on LinkedIn. There's somebody sent me a picture of a package that is a tool to cut open the packaging, and it was in the clamshell. I was like, do you not see the irony in this?
I think there's a really good Curb Your Enthusiasm clip on him trying to open one of those packages. So feel free to YouTube that if you get a chance.
I can't wait. I love that show.
Fantastic. So just a heads up, since I'm on the factory floor, there might be some noises that sound like an apartment being fixed next door. So I'll try to mute when I'm not speaking here. So yeah, moving on, we have, what are the main criteria for sustainability regarding manufacturing packaging?
Sorry, I was reading the questions in the comments. Sorry.
Oh, all good.
What was the question? What are the main?
Yeah, what are the main criteria for sustainability regarding manufacturing packaging?
Oh man, I mean I look at, and I know Scott, you mentioned landfill use, and that's super important. I'm of the belief that there is an existential threat to all of humanity, which is in fact global warming. So we don't need to get into the politics of that, but I do think that it's a very big problem. And so I tend to follow the energy and what type of, like, how much energy is being used. So for example, I was having a conversation, I host a packaging happy hour with the Institute of Packaging Professionals, the IOPP, and it's awesome. And I was having a conversation with somebody who works for a very large wine and spirits company. And they did an analysis on plastic bottles versus glass bottles, and the carbon impact of those. And he said, you would not believe how much carbon is released in glass manufacturing and then in glass recycling, because you have to heat it up so much. Not something I never even thought about. And so it's such a difficult conversation because there's so many different areas to look at when it comes to sustainability. And I think sometimes we let perfection get in the way of progress, where we think like, well, this has to be absolutely perfect, instead of making the next best decision. And I'm always going to be of the mindset that we should follow the energy output. That's kind of my, and whether that's the energy output to go into the landfill or the, what is being created there. And that's kind of where I try to chase that thing down. So for example, post-consumer recycled content is a pretty big win right now. And it should be, because recycling is a for-profit business, and people don't like to know that, but it is. It doesn't matter if something can be recycled theoretically or chemically. It could be really easy to be recycled, but if there's no value at the end of that recycling stream, if we've not created any demand, it's just like anything. I mean, you guys are in manufacturing. It wouldn't do you any good to make a product that nobody wanted to buy. Mm-hmm. And so, when you start talking about these things, you start looking at it from a much bigger picture. You start to see that why something like post-consumer recycled content does become important, because if we want to perpetuate recycling, we have to create that demand. So I feel like I got a little soapboxy and off topic there, so I apologize. I wasn't following my notes.
Yeah, I mean, it's a super rich topic, and often I feel it's like boiling the ocean, that if you try to look at everything, your head will explode. So there's the energy, there's the landfill, mm-hmm. there's the harvesting components from the earth, and what impact does that have? Like you could probably go through 20 different things. And I agree also, it's an incremental game, like just improve something. And then over time, if we improve it 1% a day,
Right.
over time, we're going to make substantial gains, but certainly building awareness to it. With plastic, if I remember the stats correctly, on average or across the globe, only 9% of the plastic is actually recycled. Um, and the value of plastic, well, there is a for-profit business. It's not that valuable. Like roughly a pound of ABS is, say, $1 a pound. Whereas with metal, it takes a lot more energy to get that out of the earth and turn it into aluminum. But once you've got the aluminum, it's valuable and it's very easy to recycle. So I think the recycled rates on that, say for a can that you drink, it takes about 3 months after you recycle that can before it's on the shelf again. And there's a lot less leakage in that stream. So it's one of these, just to illustrate, there's so many different variables to weigh. But for me, I decided I'm just going to pick landfill, because whenever I'm sailing, it kills me to see plastic in the ocean. And I feel like in my job, I have the ability to influence that. And I totally agree with Adam on the climate change. It just, for me, I have a little bit more trouble influencing that. So I figured I'd focus on something that at least for me is very concrete.
Fantastic. So now getting into a little bit of the cost aspect of packaging. So we have one question about the cost control for packaging, but more specifically, what are the ways of keeping the cost of packaging down but not sacrificing its quality? Adam, you want to kick us off?
Yeah, it should not be it shouldn't be an either or. I'll be totally honest. It should be a both and you should demand it. And unfortunately, I think that there are a lot of packaging companies who create this dynamic because for whatever reason. So, I mean, cost control with packaging is obviously super critical because it's not something. It's just, you have to keep buying it over and over and over again. And so you want to make sure that it's in the correct thing. But I'll give you an example. So there was it was a vodka company, and they changed their labels, and the label was a little bit less expensive. And they went from a metallized foil substrate on glass to a clear. It was a really sleek looking label on clear. And they got it all in the market. They spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on new labels, and their sales plummeted, absolutely plummeted. And they were like, what is going on? And they found out it's because nobody could find their product, just changed it. So in an effort to rebrand a little bit and save a little bit of money on label costs, they ended up losing countless amounts of market share. And so I really try to get people to sincerely focus on the total cost of their labels, so, or their packaging, whatever it is. So for example, I know the question comes up about sustainability, and as rightly it should. When we can understand who our target market is, and especially as Gen Z is starting to come into the mix, millennials have been here for a while. I don't know what I am. I was born in 1980, so I think I heard Xennial was a term that got thrown out to me. I don't know. But I was reading an article in Forbes that they're willing to spend 10% more on an item that is sustainable. So we can all do math. I think everyone on here is really smart. So if you have a product and let's say it's $100 and you can charge $10 more for that, and your packaging is 50 cents, and if your packaging goes up to 55 cents, what's the total value of your packaging if it's driving 10% more sales? I can't, no one's going to guarantee that, but it's just, there doesn't have to be this decision. It gets really stupid when somebody spends a lot of money on packaging just to have cool packaging, but it's not driving any value. So, we should never advocate for that ever. But if there is value to be gained, and there are tons of ways to get that data, if there's value to be gained, then you should make just like you would on your product. I mean, you're not gonna, you don't want to cut corners in manufacturing just to save. You don't want to, what's the term? Don't cut off your nose to spite your face, or something like that. I don't know. We have weird phrases when you think about it, like skinning cats and killing birds with stones. It's odd. I don't know where this stuff came from, but yeah. So, I mean, it really does take somebody to look at it, you know, kind of holistically. There are ways you can control it with volume and, you know, reductions, and over packaging is a huge problem sustainably and from a cost standpoint. So that's what I got on that.
Mm. Yeah, and when I think about it, as we were talking about, the packaging is a product. So we always go back to the fundamentals of cost, quality, and schedule. So if you often pay more money, you can get your packaging quicker, and it may be a higher quality, but you're going to pay for it. So sort of thinking about how to do those trade-offs. In terms of the actual cost, we always would start with the bill of materials and then try to break things down into the most basic elements of that. So let's say you have an eFlu master carton, so just some corrugated cardboard. Well, that's made up of typically 3 layers and some glue. So what I'd like to know is how much does that actual paper cost? And then how much does the glue cost? And then what's the labor rate and what's the markup? And then from there, I can make sure that I'm, you know, getting a fair price. Now, it may be harder in practice unless you actually go to the packaging vendor, which we absolutely do, to get visibility into that. Or if you have injection molded plastic, you know, what's the resin, what's the size, tonnage of the press, and so on. So it's definitely possible to understand the cost of it. For the value side, in working with so many companies, I'd say most of them err on the side of doing packaging that's way too fancy. We had one customer a while back, maybe 10 years ago, that was building a really, really cool, innovative product. And I think the product cost $40, and they spent $10 on the packaging because they wanted to have the Apple experience. And it was this whole origami thing that unfolded and was awesome.
Yeah.
The thing is, they were selling it direct. So it was totally stupid because the customer had already bought the product. It didn't need to market itself.
Right.
And again, it was we all make mistakes, but that one, you know, if they had spent just $1 on packaging instead of 10, they would have had $9 to reinvest in, either put in their pocket or invest in R&D or marketing that would actually work. So I think the tendency is to be too Apple-like. And maybe if you're Apple or somebody else, like, there is merit to that, but towards what Adam said, you want to make sure the value is commensurate with the expense.
Yeah, and understand your price point. I mean, Apple's selling $1,000 computer that fits in your pocket. So for them to spend $3 or $4 is I mean, I'm not saying it's not a big deal. It's just that it kind of does make sense. I remember one time I bought a tea product for $14, and the packaging was probably $3. And it's just like a hot tea. And I told my wife, I was like, I bet this tea sucks. I bet the quality of this tea is awful, because they spent all their money on marketing and packaging. And sure enough, the tea was terrible, and it didn't last long. It was in Starbucks. It was no good. Because what they should have done is just, you know, use a box, like just have normal tea packaging, and spend their money on the quality of the tea, not on trying to market something. So totally, completely agree. Some of the best packaging right now is incredibly simple, is very efficient, is incredibly cost effective, and is and that's what everybody probably wants.
Yeah, I mean, I find myself gravitating towards that very elegant packaging, but simple. It's just like, it's been so thoughtfully designed, as opposed to more like a brute force.
Like this box behind me is a shoe. I really like sneakers, and it's by the brand Off-White, who is you know, he's a high-end clothing designer. But it's just a simple shoebox for a premium brand. But it comes in, it feels elegant. It feels, but I know it's simple. They didn't go crazy. You know, Nike just released a shoe where they didn't do any secondary packaging. So the shipping box was the shoe box, and they made it out of recycled content called Space Hippie. So anyway, there's ways to do it that can be fun.
I'm going to skip to a question that kind of carries this conversation a little bit even deeper. So as people either go from e-commerce to retail or retail to e-commerce, someone has a very in-depth question. I thought it was really relatable to what we were just talking about. So have there been studies about how much customers really value the unboxing experience? Companies seem to be investing a lot in their packaging these days, often at the expense of sustainability. And I'm wondering if the investment is really valued. Would customers actually value packaging that's explicitly designed as to be as sustainable as possible, even more? And this question in particular applies to direct-to-consumer products that don't sit on retail shelves. So I know we talked a little bit about that, but if you guys want to dive a little bit deeper.
Yeah, I mean, I think like I make unboxing videos because I like packaging, and I kind of nerd out about it a little bit. I think that if you this is going to be the case with anything. If you are not thinking about your customer, if you don't have them in mind with whatever you're designing, then you're probably, I don't think it's going to go super well. So I don't know. I don't know any specific studies. I'm sure somebody has a study out there about it. I don't know what they are. I will say that there are simple, easy ways to create an unboxing experience for your customer and using packaging that doesn't involve having to overpackage or at the expense of sustainability or whatever it might be. So, you'll see a lot of companies who will print on the inside of a corrugated box, as an example, just to create a little touch. Or they'll use branded tape, like branded packaging tape. These kinds of things are ways that you can help create it. The problem is that if you can create a really bad experience, and that impacts your brand integrity. So I always think of it as a tertiary concern. If you can do it, awesome, but don't design your packaging specifically for an unboxing video. It has to be functional, because the worst thing that can happen, and we've all seen it before, is you get a box in direct to consumer, e-commerce. It's this massive box with a ton of void fill. Nobody's thought about it. And it's a small box on the inside of it. And now it's like, again, your customer bought it. Why did they pay all of that money for all this over packaging that they now have to dispose of? They have to fill up the recycling container, or worse yet, just put it in their trash. Or they have to fill up the back of their truck and drive it to the landfill, because, you're just creating a burden for your customers, and subconsciously and consciously, it's bad. It's really bad for your brand to do that. So, I don't know what the studies are, but I can tell you just the way that the human brain works. If it's bad, that's not good. There's my metaphysical statement on unboxing videos.
Yeah. I think that as a consumer, the unboxing experience is incredibly important. But I also look at it that you don't need to pay a lot of money for it, but you may have to pay a lot of NRE or put a lot of thought into it up front. I mean, whenever I order something and it comes and the stickies don't come unstuck easily, or I have to get out a knife or things like that, it kills me. And as Adam was saying, if I end up with just a big pile of shit that I have to throw away, that's really unpleasant. So much so for me, often I won't buy the product again. So I love oysters, and thought I would get some oysters delivered to me during COVID, and was so excited for them, but they came in a big styrofoam tub. And I'm like, all right, well, that's my last thing of oysters I'm going to get from this company. It was just so disappointing. Whereas other ones, we get the green chef, which is like a Blue Apron, just a different color, I guess. But they don't have one of those foam or foil space bags. It's all cardboard for the insulating thing. So I'm much more inclined to buy them on a regular basis, because I'm not creating all this landfill, which again is my pet peeve.
Did you guys know I've never done a live Zoom webinar, so I'm just discovering new things. I didn't see that there's like a Q&A. I thought it was just in the chat. There's like...
Yep. Yeah, so we got the Q&A. So those questions will accumulate, and if we have time at the end, we can certainly address them, or we'll reach out to you all afterwards, and then the chats.
I'll try typing some answers.
Yeah, well. A little more free flowing. So okay. Cool. So maybe changing speeds a little bit here, talking a little bit more about sustainability. So how to shift from cradle to grave product development mindset to cradle mindset for sustainable product development and manufacturing. Scott, you want to touch on this first?
Sure. Yeah, I know when we were starting, I always use the analogy of an alphabet, where A is you come up with the idea for this product, and then Z is it's delivered to the customer. And as I get older, I realize that that's not a complete view. It's really A, still the idea, but Z is when the product is no longer useful. So when it's actually in the hands of the customer, you're probably around the middle of the alphabet, the M or the N, and just having that perspective of the whole alphabet, but very early on, because we know a lot of early decisions cast really long shadows. And as we're finding, you can't go and design a product and then try to layer on sustainability and be as successful if you do it right before manufacturing, but it's actually things you have to design ahead of time. So for example, if you were building a product with plastic, thinking about what resins you use, because all resins typically have different shrinkage rates as you injection mold them. So that would influence how you design the tool. Or thinking about whether you would use adhesives to glue two dissimilar resins together versus mechanical fastenings that can be pulled apart to make it easy either to repair or to put in the recycling stream. So I think the trick is thinking about it upfront when you can make the changes easily. It's a lot easier to change CAD than it is to change a steel tool. And it gives you a lot more freedom and visibility is one. And then two, thinking about it, not just what happens when it gets to the customer, but when it actually gets to its end of life. And maybe it's gone around the track a few times, which would be awesome. But if not, then how do you get it to break down as quickly as possible with as little negative byproduct as possible?
Yeah.
Cool.
I would, I mean, I don't have a ton more to add on to that. It's been interesting following. So if you're really curious to follow two developments, one is extended producer responsibility that they're doing in the EU when it comes to products and packaging. So if you make the product, you're responsible for its cradle to cradle journey. And then second is you could connect with Dr. Bruce Welt out of the University of Florida. He heads up the packaging department there, but he's written a lot of articles on plasma gasification. So essentially taking anything, I mean, any waste. So whether it's electronics, food, toys, whatever it is, and creating a way to use plasma. I don't know. This is not my world, but I just know I've read a few of his articles and talked to him. But basically is a way to take our waste and convert it to energy and then pump it back into our energy grid and create a valuable byproduct from it so that our landfills would actually become sources for energy and not sources for contamination. So I don't know where he's at with that, but I would connect up with him and follow him. It's pretty cool.
Cool. Jumping back into packaging, we've been talking about a lot of different materials that you could use. So this person's curious about what options exist for more sustainable packaging. So the default packaging options currently seem to involve a lot of plastic and paper waste. So if you have any other suggestions there.
Oh, materials are always there's some. I had somebody call me yesterday and say, hey, I have a coating, an antimicrobial coating for labels that you could put in retail environments so that anytime somebody touches like a gas pump, you'd have a label on it and it kills 90, it's like Lysol, but on a label for a year and it's activated with UV light. I was like, oh my gosh, that's awesome. So it's really cool, smart people doing really awesome things. There's a guy here in Salt Lake City where I live who I've connected with who is attempting to create cellulose, which is the basis for paper, and cellulose acetate and some other things. But making cellulose out of CO2. It's called polymicrobial cellulose production. So he's just creating 99.9 repeating pure cellulose flakes using a bioreactor and air and water and sunlight. You think through the ramifications of something like that on a larger scale. Trees are the greatest absorber of carbon. They're just constant, and the older they get, the more they absorb. So when we cut them down to use for things like paper, and then it's kind of a double whammy because we're also losing their absorption. So if you leave trees standing and now you're making the product out of thin air, literally, that's pretty awesome. He's early stages, but it's really cool to watch some of these emerging technologies. There's There's, like PLA has been around for a while, polylactic acid, which is made out of corn. It's a plastic that's made from corn. So I think it's been fun to watch a lot of the innovations that have been happening in the packaging industry, and that's been forced by consumers. To be totally honest, it's you and I who are saying we don't like this, and we're going to stop buying your product and we're going to go buy this product because they're doing better things. So we have a role to play in this as well as consumers.
Yeah, it seems like there's been a whole flurry of new startups working on more sustainable packaging. So there's one, I believe, over in Norway looking at using seaweed to make straws as a starting point, which I think is pretty cool. We dove into it on one of our Dragon blogs. One of my colleagues, Nicholas Averill, looked into bioresins. And from what I recall, there's a couple of different ways to think about it. Some is how do you create the resin? So typically most resin is made from oil, but you can now make it from corn or other things. And then the second part of that is how long does it take to degrade? And what I think he found is many of the bioresins still stuck around for 400 years. They weren't any better at degrading. So you have to think about what resins are actually compostable, or can you get to degrade in an industrial composting facility in something like 90 days. But you don't want to conflate one that's made from corn, with one that's going to degrade in 90 days. It's important to understand the difference. I believe there's another company called Zoom, which is working on more sustainable pizza boxes, because they're not recyclable due to the oil. You need to put them in an industrial composting facility, which most people don't do. You just have to look out on the street on a Monday morning and see everybody's trying to recycle their pizza boxes. So it'd be great to see some more innovation on that front. But it does
Good news on that front. The Recycling Industry of America just last week put out that they are accepting pizza boxes with food waste in them in the United States. Yep.
You know why?
I don't know. I don't know why. It's not in the EU. They won't do it in the EU. But in the United States, they just put out an article. I think it was last week that said, "Please recycle your pizza boxes. We need them."
That's awesome.
Yeah, that's kind of cool.
Yeah. Yeah, it does feel like, though, that there are more and more startups trying to attack this problem, which is fantastic. And then I see also many of the big multinational companies like Walmart, Kellogg's, and Hershey are also looking to get to 100% recyclable or reusable or compostable packaging by 2025 or so. So it's definitely on company and consumers' radar screens.
And if you think about it, if you're, I know we're running short on time, but if you're those big companies, it actually behooves you to push for responsibility in packaging, because it ends up actually driving your costs down. You were talking about aluminum, Scott, and how, if an aluminum is hyper recyclable, if we all did our job recycling aluminum, the cost of recycled aluminum would go down, and it's better for Walmart. So I think sometimes a light bulb really went off for me when I realized, like, recycling isn't an altruistic, like, this is just a good thing to do. It is a for-profit business entity, and we need to make sure that it can make money, and we need to help it make money so that it can go on in perpetuity. And we want to encourage that. I'll tell you that the drop in oil price has not helped a lot of the industry, and China's broad national sword, where they stopped taking out recycling, was no good. So we got work to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I also always go back to reduce, reuse, recycle. We have an old-fashioned milk service where every Wednesday they bring milk in glass bottles.
Yeah, so do we.
Milk and put it out, and it's great. Like, there's some cost to wash the bottle and sanitize and recap it, but it's got to be lower than the cost of recycling the glass.
Yeah, you'll love this book then. You should read it and buy it. He talks a lot about the milkman.
Awesome.
It's really cool. So I get $0 for promoting that book.
Excellent. I think we got time for one more. And so, again, thank you everybody for participating in the conversation. again, this is being recorded and we have everybody's, submitted questions. So we'll try to follow up with as many of those as possible afterwards, as well as these current submitted questions as well. So to wrap things up here, talking a little bit more about the cost of this process. So one thing that is important for a hardware company is cash flow management. And have we found that the transitioning to sustainable alternatives for packaging involves longer lead times and or charge a premium price for a green alternative? So I'll let you guys go with that. And we got about 5 minutes left.
Sorry, I was looking for the question on my little question sheet. Where was... I like to read it because I actually wrote notes down.
Number 6.
Number 6. Okay, got it. You can start, Scott.
Yeah, sure. So in terms of the cost, generally, I would say in my experience, which is more limited than Adam's, using different materials that are more sustainable is going to have a higher cost of goods sold. Per the previous example, if you spend 5 cents more and can sell the product for another $10, then there's a pretty clear ROI on that as a differentiator. If we can go back to reducing and using less packaging to achieve the same goal, maybe you don't need esoteric materials or the cutting edge ones, but if you can just spend a little bit more effort in NRE up front designing the packaging, you can get a higher efficiency out of it using less material, which would be a way to cut down the cost.
Yep. Yeah, I spend most of my time talking with people about this exact topic. And so it does vary from product to product, company to company. And really going all the way back to what we first talked about, which is identifying the definition of sustainability. So if you're going to want seaweed straws, it's going to cost you a lot more money because there's just not as much available product. And so you will probably need to pay more for that. If you want compostable films, let's say for a food product, you're going to pay more for that product. And I would only encourage people to do that if, again, one, if it provides the same level of protection for the product, and two, if it's going to provide value to your brand. Now, there are some people who just say, I don't care, I'm doing the right thing, and I'm going to put this into compostable, which, by the way, has its own set of, I don't have enough time, but recyclers in America hate compostable packaging. They hate it with a passion because everybody, stop recycling your compostable packaging. If it says compostable, it's probably not recyclable. So stop putting it in there. And we do it all the time because it looks green and it says green things. And so we just automatically think I put it in my recycle bin. And it's causing problems for recycling companies, contaminating our recycling stream. If it says compostable, you either need to send it to the landfill, which is not ideal, or send it to an industrial composting facility, which there are not enough of in North America. Sorry, that was another tangent, wasn't it? But yeah, I mean, I think it all comes down to working with the right people, getting packaging engineers involved early because, Scott, you brought up a great point about they can dive in with you and understand, are you over packaging? Are you spending too much on, is your liner, do you not need, can you have a 32 ECT corrugated versus a 200-pound, virgin board? What's the difference between clay coated craft back and SBS board on folding cartons? What kind of label do you need? They can dive into all of that with you and save you a ton of time, headache, money, and energy. I'm not a packaging engineer, but there are a ton of them out there and they're super underappreciated. And you should definitely engage with one. That would be my final soapbox. They're worth their weight in gold.
Excellent. Well, thanks again, everybody, for attending, and thank you, Adam and Scott, for answering such awesome questions with such detail and knowledgeable information. So, once again, thank you, everybody, for submitting all these questions because we couldn't do it without you all. we got to as many as we could, and I know that there were a few left over, so we'll again try to scroll through as many of those and follow up with people directly. And if you didn't get your question answered, feel free to reach out to us at help@dragoninnovation.com, and we'll try to answer those questions for you. So this will be available on demand as a recording, so we'll send that around to all of you, and then it'll be available on our blog probably either tomorrow or Monday. So thanks again, everybody.
Am I allowed to say how people can get a hold of me? Is that allowed?
Yeah, for sure.
Sweet. You can just go to adampeak.com, and there's a quick little contact form on there. So if you got any questions, there's even like a schedule 30 minutes, which is problematic for my calendar sometimes because I make that available, but I love talking about packaging. So if you got any questions, hit me up and we can make some time.
Cool. Yeah, we'll add that Adam's contact info to the blog with the on-demand recording as well on there. So we'll be able to get in touch with everybody. But once again, thanks everybody for coming. It's been a really interesting and awesome conversation. So we'll see you all next time.
Cool.
Thank you.
Guys.
Bye, guys.